Hello, and thanks for joining us for Law in the Library. I'm your host, Robert Reeders. The Alachua County Library District and Three Rivers Legal Services have partnered for over 10 years on the Law in the Library series. Three Rivers Legal Services is an LLC that has provided free civil legal services since 1978. They have offices in Gainesville, Fernandina Beach, Jacksonville, and Lake City, and provide assistance on domestic violence and family law, housing and landlord-tenant issues, foreclosure defense, money and debt, veterans issues, record sealing and expungement, elder law, hurricane and disaster assistance, and public benefits. Their telephone number is 352-372-0519, and their website is www.trls.org. Today's presentation is on expungement, presented by Samantha Howell, the pro bono director for Three Rivers Legal Services, and Leigh Scott, Director of Community Engagement at Released Reentry. Ms. Howell earned her law degree from the University of Albany, and her areas of focus include nonprofit work, poverty law, domestic violence and women's rights, prisoners' rights, civil rights and civil liberties, social justice issues, public benefits, volunteer recruitment and management, program development, pro bono program development and management, event planning, and remote supervision. Also joining us is Mr. Scott, who has spent the past few years as an advocate for the homeless community as the Community Engagement Director at Grace Marketplace, a large low-barrier homeless shelter. He recently moved over to Released Reentry, where he spends about half his time with participants, connecting them to resources and support as they're coming home from incarceration, and half his time in the community gathering resources and support for formerly incarcerated people, as well as advocating on their behalf. He is a lifelong Gainesville resident and the husband of the amazing Abigail Pere Gentile, who does food justice work with her nonprofit Grace Grows. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to you, Samantha.
Great, thank you. It's such a pleasure to be here. It's been a few months since I've been able to join, so I appreciate you having us back. I want to take a few minutes before I turn it over to Leigh to just talk a little bit about Three Rivers Legal Services, how it fits into expungement work and working with folks who are experiencing incarceration or who are returning, and some of the services that are available in your communities in Alachua County and beyond. So not in my bio, but something I feel like is appropriate to share here is that I actually did prisoners' rights work for several years in New York State. When I lived up there as an attorney, I was a pro bono director at a nonprofit. And all we did was individual representation on issues of conditions of confinement. So challenges to solitary confinement, inadequate access to medical and mental health care, guard brutality assaults, things like that, medical parole. And I spent a significant amount of my time there actually working with people who had been accused of or convicted of sex-related offenses. And I found the work very rewarding, and I really like it. And so I've been so excited to have Leigh's new program, one that we can partner with and work with, and to work with other organizations throughout the state who do this kind of work, because it is really desperately needed for folks who are still experiencing incarceration, but also for returning citizens. Unfortunately, having that interaction with the criminal system is usually a scarlet letter for folks. And so returning is really challenging, and getting access to resources that are not just available on paper, but actually available is really critical for successful re-engagement and reentry. So with that, I want to just say a few things about Three Rivers Legal Services. We are a nonprofit legal services organization. We cover 17 counties throughout North Central Florida. As Robert mentioned, we have 4 offices. Unfortunately, one of our restrictions from our funders is that we cannot represent people who are experiencing incarceration. We can provide them with information and education, but we can't do that kind of active representation for folks. We also are not allowed to do criminal law. However, for folks who are returning, who have legal issues, discrimination, housing issues, seal and expungement questions, we can provide representation as well as advice, but we still can't do criminal law. So I just want to put that out there, because a lot of times these worlds get conflated a little bit. But one of the exceptions we have to that prohibition on criminal law work is seal and expungement. And since I started at Three Rivers a couple years ago, I've just gotten really entrenched in this, and I find it to be a very frustrating but interesting area of practice. I find more often than not, I'm actually giving people bad news. But what I try to make sure folks know is what their rights are and why the law is the way it is, right? Because laws are written by humans and they can be changed. And I think that's an important thing for folks to remember. So what I want to start with is a little bit of an overview on expungement. I usually do this at clinics and give about a 30-minute presentation. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to hit some highlights and then refresh our contact information because, as I said, all of our services are free. If we are not able to take your case in-house because we don't have enough staff or whatever, my job as the pro bono director is to go out into the private legal world, the private bar, and bring in volunteers who will then work with our clients one-on-one at no cost. So there's sort of a supplementary program that Three Rivers offers called their Pro Bono Legal Assistance Program. That is not staff attorneys, but it is free legal assistance through the private bar. And that's where a lot of our seal and expungement work is being done, especially in Alachua County. We have some just rock star volunteers who are taking a lot of cases and really helping folks. So with expungement, unfortunately, most people are not eligible. The rules in Florida are very restrictive. So there's a few different types of ways to limit access to your record, your criminal record. And those are generally referred to as sealing or expunging. And I like to talk about it in the context of what happened before computers because it's easier to grapple. So before the age of computers, when your case was sealed, it was literally put inside an envelope and sealed and tucked away. And only certain people would have access to it. That's still the same. But now there's the internet, so it gets a little bit more complicated. Before computers, expungement meant somebody took your file and they put it in a shredder and nobody had access to it. Once things are on the internet, once they're on computers, they never really go away. So for example, an expungement might clear your record at the Florida Department of Law Enforcement level, FDLE, so that if someone runs a criminal record report on you, it does not show up. It may take it off of the court website from the county in which the case existed. So if you log into the Alachua court website, the case doesn't show up. But if there was ever a news article, if it was ever posted about on Facebook or X or Instagram, if your information was sold or obtained by a third party, like those websites, who'smyneighbor.com or whatever they are, those sites compile publicly accessible data and then put that information together to sell, they still have it. So it's always still possible, even if you successfully seal or expunge a case, that your information is going to be out there because at some point it was on the internet. So I want people to understand that first. There are some steps that can be taken, but they're extremely limited, right? If a news article, a news outlet covered your arrest, they're not going to take that down off their website. So it's important to know that. The other thing that folks should understand about this process is that sealing and expunging is going to help you with housing and employment. It does not give you your voting rights back, does not give you your gun rights back. If that's what you're interested in, you need to look at a clemency or a pardon. If you are successful with clemency or pardon, your record is not sealed or expunged. They are two entirely independent processes. Seal and expunging is granted at the discretion of a court, the court where your criminal case was heard. Clemency and pardon is granted at the discretion of the governor. So I have had a lot of people ask, they want their gun rights restored. Seal and expunging is not going to help you. You have to do the pardon or the clemency. But your case is still going to be public record unless you also do that. So just understand there are two different processes and they serve different functions. Now, what I said at the top of this, the very discouraging thing that most people are not eligible. That's what I want to get into kind of really quickly. I'm not going to go into all of the ins and outs, but I do want to do a little bit of an overview here. There are some very basic threshold eligibility requirements for court-ordered sealing or expunction. Florida calls it expunction. I say expungement. It's the same thing. It's just the 10 years of being in New York. It's bad habit. So in Florida, the way the statute is structured is if somebody has ever in their entire adult life been adjudicated guilty of a criminal offense or adjudicated delinquent of a felony as a minor or certain misdemeanors as a minor, they are forever prohibited of seeking a sealing or expungement. That's the statute in Florida right now. It doesn't matter if you want an expungement or a sealing of case number 1 and case number 2 is where you had the adjudication of guilt. Florida does not care. If you've ever had an adjudication of guilt as an adult on a criminal case or a delinquency adjudication as a minor on a felony or certain misdemeanors, you cannot get a sealing and expunging. Now, here's what I'm going to say about that. It is a state law. State laws can be changed. ... I will say no more. But it is important to know these are not constitutional components. These are statutes that can be changed by the state legislature, but that's where we are today. Now, there's a few little wonky things that happen here and there. I'm focused on court-ordered seal and expungement, and that's kind of the rule. It doesn't matter if the case was 50 years ago. It doesn't matter if it was a criminal traffic case or a misdemeanor or a felony. I met with somebody who had 2 misdemeanor charges from 83 and 84, something around there. Both of them dropped. Fast forward to 2016, 2017, 2018, and they had paid a fine on a criminal traffic ticket for driving on a suspended license. Okay. Because it was charged as a criminal traffic, a CT in your case number, that's a criminal case. And by paying the fine, they were adjudicated guilty, which means they could not have these charges from 84 or 85 taken off their record. One thing that a lot of folks don't understand is that when you pay a ticket on a criminal traffic case, that's an adjudication. And so that can impact you if you have another case that you want to get sealed or expunged. The other thing that's important to realize is that while the adjudication of guilt kicks you out of both of those categories of sealing or expunging, you can get your case sealed if you had a withhold of adjudication. However, the caveat to that is that if your case involved certain delineated crimes that are laid out in the statute, depending on your plea, it might be an ineligible offense. So, for example, I'm going to use domestic battery because I see that case a lot. So if you've been charged with domestic battery and you plead not guilty, and then the case is ultimately dismissed, there's no adjudication, you can get that expunged. However, if you pled nolo contendere, or you pled not guilty, or you pled guilty, and the outcome was a withhold of adjudication, you can't get it expunged, but you can seek for the sealing, okay? And remember, sealing means some people are still going to see it, but only limited people. With a case like a domestic battery, depending on your plea, however, that case is not eligible for sealing and expungement. And where this becomes really important is with nolo contendere pleas. So in the context of plea agreements in the criminal system, if you plead nolo contendere, you are pleading no contest. What you're saying is, I'm not saying I'm guilty. What I'm saying is you have enough evidence that you might be able to convict me, right? So I'm not going to argue it. We're going to plea down usually, maybe a lesser offense, but I'm not admitting guilt. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying you might be successful if we go to trial. That's a nolo contendere. In the context of plea agreements, nolo contendere is not a guilty plea. In the context of sealing, nolo contendere is a guilty plea. So your public defender may encourage you to plead nolo contendere because that makes sense in the context of your case. But when it comes to the expungement, it may actually have an impact. So if you're in those situations, you want to make sure you talk to your public defender about what the potential impact of your plea is on a future sealing or expungement, because it can have impacts. Now, again, all this to say, these are state laws and these can change tomorrow. And everything I'm saying today could be wrong. So, just bear in mind, you want to talk to your criminal attorney about this. I'm not giving you advice on what to do. But that's part of what makes this really complicated, right? Is on the one hand, you're like, oh, if I plead no contest, then I'm not pleading guilty, so I should be fine. And yet, with certain offenses, it kicks you out of that sealing. The other thing I'm going to flag, and then I'm going to shush about this, is with sealing cases, as I've mentioned, some people still have access. These are referred to as entitled entities, and they are also spelled out within a statute. There's, I want to say 7 or 11. I can never remember the prime number associated with it, but it's an odd number. It's 7 or 11. And there's basically just different state entities, excuse me, that can have access to your sealing. They can see that a case has been sealed. They're not going to get all the details, but they can see a little bit. They can see that something's been sealed. Broadly speaking, these are going to be agencies that involve getting a firearm and working with law enforcement or a vulnerable population. So children, the elderly, people who have disabilities. If you apply, a lot of people come, they want to apply for a law enforcement job. Law enforcement is going to see that there was a sealing. If you want to apply to get a gun, Department of Ag is going to see that there was a sealing. And then broadly speaking, again, it's going to be your professional licensing department. So if you're trying for a medical license or a law license, there's going to be some, those are usually entitled entities you can see. I'm not going to lay them all out, just broadly speaking, keep that in mind, because what I do have a lot of folks ask about is going into the medical profession and going into law enforcement. And those are generally going to be two areas where people can see that something has been sealed. Very last thing I'm going to say is that there is a way to kind of work around some of this if you're not eligible. So in cases where you are not eligible for a sealing or an expungement, if the purpose of that was for employment and you want to work in a medical field, the Agency for Healthcare Administration, AHCA, actually has an application that allows you to get around the level 2 background check requirement. So it's not that they don't know about your case. Instead, you pre-disclose and say, I have this domestic battery from 25 years ago. Here's what happened. I'm not eligible to get it sealed and expunged. And they're kind of doing sort of like an individualized background check on you. And if approved, it's, it means that you don't have to have that level 2 background clearance. I have no information on how successful that is. It's on their website. We tell people about it all the time. So I know that it's out there, but it's pretty limited for, working in the medical field. And it covers cases that are not eligible for sealing and expungement. So there are some options available. And, going over this, really kind of the upshot, the takeaway that I want you to have is it's complicated. And organizations like Leigh's and mine, the library, are here to provide you with resources so that you don't have to do it on your own. So if you're in a situation where you are reentering, where you are struggling because of a past charge or conviction and you're not sure what to do, reach out, ask. Even if you're not eligible for seal and expungement, I'm going to explain what options you do have available to you if there are any. Sometimes there aren't. But that's also important to know, right? It's important to know that you've hit a brick wall, or that, maybe there's something else that you can do. Maybe there's another organization or another way in that works like this level 2 background exemption form. So reach out. Again, Robert mentioned this at the top, but our phone number is 352. I should know this. 372-0519. I have my number right here. I don't have our office number. Or you can go to trls.org. We have an online application. We return everybody who reaches out to us. We reach back out to you. I know sometimes being on hold on the phone can be frustrating, but give us a call. And if you have questions, share with your friends. We are one of the resources that are available here. And if you're watching this from outside of Alachua County, as I mentioned, we cover 17 counties. But there's organizations like Three Rivers throughout the state of Florida. So maybe you live in Alachua, but your case is in Miami and you're not sure what to do. Give us a call. We can actually connect you with the organization in Miami that would. And that's part of what our role here is Three Rivers. Yes, legal representation and advocacy and advice, but I personally just hate saying no, period. So I always want to say no and like, no, we can't help you. And here's another resource, or but here's another resource. And part of that is why it's so important to have organizations like Leigh's that we can reach out to and say, I have somebody who came in and they're having these issues. Do you know of any other resources? The libraries, in my experience, are great for this. Librarians know everything. They literally work in a building of knowledge. So go and check with them. They're really connected with the community. And reach out and ask questions. There are no bad questions. It's really best that you learn what your rights are and act on those as much as you can, rather than sort of staying in the dark. We don't want you to do that. We want you to be active, engaged participants as much as you can be. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Leigh. But thank you again, Robert, for having us. And thank you to the viewers for chiming in and watching this and hopefully sharing this with folks who might be needing this information. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. I was taking notes as Samantha was talking, as usual. Samantha is amazing, and I've watched them do really good work in real time out at Grace Marketplace. So my name's Leigh Scott. I'm the Community Outreach Director at Released Reentry. And if you're watching this and you are a returning citizen, welcome home. We're so glad you're home. And really that spirit is kind of what drives Released Reentry. We are glad that you're home. And I know that that's not always the feeling when you have to walk into, say, to get your driver's license or the Social Security office or probation, and you have to go to all these different places. And a lot of times you're feeling less than, you're feeling othered. And we are legitimately glad that you're home. And that is because we're an organization that is led by justice impacted people. I myself am a justice impacted person. And that's what we're here to do. Is it's folks that have walked the road coming home, helping other folks get them connected to resources and support. So a little bit about us. A few years ago, our founder and director, Emily Westerholm, had just moved to Gainesville, and she had done justice work and reentry work in Virginia and New Orleans and Oakland. And she moved to Gainesville, and she saw that there was a pretty big gap for reentry support for folks. In fact, the reentry support here in Alachua County was the good folks at the library. That was primarily who was doing reentry, was the library. And, there was people like Samantha and others that were doing good work in that space, but there wasn't like a reentry hub. And then I worked out at Grace Marketplace, and every week I'd see a little DOC van pull up with a couple of people and drop them off and say, good luck, And so we got together along with Tracy Brown, who's the housing director at Grace, Kevin Scott, who's at Community Spring and Just Income. And we put our heads together and we started advocating at the county for them to put resources towards reentry. And then a couple of years ago, 2023, we officially became a nonprofit. And then the county said, yes, we are going to have a reentry hub. And we were named the official reentry hub here in Alachua County. And so we moved to some new offices. We are at 4104 Northwest 13th Street, right off the corner of 39th and 13th. We have a community space. We have computer labs for folks to work on job applications and Social Security and disability and, all those types of things. We have a wonderful backyard space with a basketball court and cornhole and horseshoes. And we fully encourage people to come use our space for all of the things, whether it's practical or whether it's just needing to have a space where you feel welcome for an hour, or if you're in between jobs and you just need to check in with one of us. What participants get as being a part of our organization is they get, we have Emily Westerholm, who's our director, is also a licensed mental health therapist. So you get 12 free, basically a year of free licensed mental health support. We have myself who connects folks to resources and support. We update a jobs list every week. We will pay for work boots or non-slip work shoes. If you recently got a job, we'll pay for your ID, your birth certificate, Social Security card. We have a peer support specialist. We do 2 monthly peer support meetings. The second Friday of every month at the downtown library, and the last Tuesday of every month here at Released, we do a peer support meeting, and those things are amazing. It's probably in my time incarcerated and my time out at Grace Marketplace and all of the connection and work I've done as a social worker, it is probably the coolest thing I've gotten to be a part of is those peer support meetings. It's usually like 10 to 12 of us. All of us are justice impacted. You have a wide range of folks, all the way from someone who did 25 years down to someone who did 6 weeks in jail. And we are sharing resources and support. And it can look like very practical things like who is hiring and do you know someone renting a room? And it can look like sort of the stuff that goes on, unnoticed or ignored. Like I'm having nightmares about jail, or I feel unwelcomed, or I walk into a store and I feel like I'm being followed around, and those kinds of things that only justice impacted people know. And so again, that's the second Friday of every month and the last Tuesday of every month here at Released and in the downtown library. And then we're helping connect folks to resources and support in the community. We have partnerships or, places that we can do warm handoffs with 19 different community partners. And so we are pretty engaged with places that will rent to someone if they are justice impacted. One of the barriers that people face is not knowing who will rent to them and having to pay for applications that you will not get that money back if they don't rent to you. And so we have a pretty good list of the places that will rent to justice impacted people. We have a pretty good idea on who will hire justice impacted people. We'll write letters of support. We'll advocate for you with your probation officer. All of those kinds of things, because a lot of times what's happening as someone's coming home is you're having to take 10 different buses to 20 different places to get all this stuff done. And so the idea is come here, we will make an action plan. We'll do one thing at a time. I was working with someone today, and our plan is if you're thinking about more than 3 things, I want you to put that stuff, anything more than 3 things, and we're not going to worry about it for right now, because, it can be really overwhelming to come home. You do have 50 things to do, and there is only one of you. And so people can get overwhelmed, they can get tripped up, they can make mistakes, they can put things out of order. And we kind of know where to prioritize some of that stuff, because everyone that works here is justice impacted. And so we're here to walk alongside folks. Folks are the ones that have to do the hard work. And we want people to have agency and autonomy in their own lives. They are the experts in their own lives, but we're here to do that work with them. They're not alone. People get bus passes, free bus passes as part of being a participant here. And again, one of the things that I think makes this Released really special is the free licensed mental health support and the peer support, because I think that when you come home, and I know this from personal experience, you're so overwhelmed I've got to eat, I have to find a place to live, I have to find transportation, I have to find a job. And those are have-tos. I have to do those things right now. It can't wait till next Tuesday, right? My probation officer doesn't want it to wait till next Tuesday. My stomach doesn't want it to wait till next Tuesday. I have to do those things right now, right? And so what ends up happening is we put that sort of the other areas of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, we put those on the back burner. So connection, community, mental health support, the trauma that got you into the mess in the first place, the trauma incurred from being inside a cage. And no matter what your experience being incarcerated was like, whether it was 1 night or 20 years, there are varying levels of trauma. You may have owned the experience, and it may have done something in your life different than someone else, but it is traumatic to be inside a cage, locked away from your family, right? And so all of that trauma is compounded, and then you come home and you hit the ground running, and a year and a half goes by, and that stuff starts to come up for you again. And so we put a big emphasis on kind of getting out in front of that stuff and talking about it in a community of people that has been there with a licensed mental health therapist that also herself is justice impacted. That can be a lot different than somebody who means well and does great work, but they have not been incarcerated, right? And so that's the idea of Released, and that's what we're doing. You can walk in, we take walk-ins, but you can also give us a call and make an appointment. 352-432-8600 is our number. My number is 352-565-9693. Just last year alone, we saw 715 participant interventions. We had 11 justice impacted collaborative meetings, 12 peer support groups, 19 community partnerships, and 73 visits inside the Alachua County Jail, where Emily teaches strategies for survival, creating calm, and then does some harm reduction work around substance use as well. One thing that I did not mention is the first Wednesday of every month at the Downtown Library, we do a thing called the Justice Impacted Collaborative. We've been doing it about a year and a half. It's a really cool little group of folks that get together. And the intention of the group is that working at Grace Marketplace and being justice impacted, what we were seeing was often there isn't a collaborative group where you can tell someone if something is going wrong, if there's a gap in resources, or if you're not able to see a mental health therapist for 3 months, or you weren't able, something happened to you in jail. Who do you talk to about that stuff, right? Justice impacted people, folks with mental health and substance use issues are 3 of the most silent populations because there's a lot of shame around it. There's a lot of trauma around it. It's hard to ask for help. It's hard to let somebody know if something is not being done the right way, or if there's a gap in resources. And so the intention of the Justice Impacted Collaborative is it's justice impacted people and frontline workers and social workers who are on the ground doing the work in a room at the same time, sharing resources and support. And so those rooms are really eclectic. They're really cool. It's someone who just came home in there with somebody who is an administrator at Santa Fe, or the mayor has come to those. You have, folks that work at everywhere from the UF Mobile Outreach Clinic to Grace Marketplace. You have legal advocates. It's us getting together once a month. It's the first Wednesday of every month at 5:00 at the Downtown Library. And we are kind of giving updates about where someone is tabling, or Santa Fe is putting on a free to learn event, or whatever those things are that are happening in the community, and kind of talking about ways to share resources and support in real time. And so that's the first Wednesday of every month. So that's a little bit about what we do, and welcome home. We hope to see you over here soon.
Terrific. Well, I want to thank you both so much for the great information and all the great work the organizations are doing to support the needs of our community. And I want to thank our viewers for attending today's presentation. Our next Law in the Library episode will premiere on Wednesday, February 12th at 5:30. The topic will be injunctions for protection. Previous episodes of Law in the Library are available on the library's website at www.aclib.us/law-library. And with that, I want to say good afternoon and thanks again. See you soon.